start talking about privacy, I want to give a shout out to Martin Hellman. He was just amazing yesterday. And I have to tell you, when I was asked to do this keynote, I was like, oh yeah, this will be really great. Then I saw Martin Hellman on the list too, and I'm like, oh crap, I have to talk after him? That's not going to be good. The other thing is that I'm in a PhD program and I'm studying cryptography. And I took an exam on Wednesday before arriving here and pretty much bombed it, in full disclosure. And so when I saw Martin, I kind of punched him in the arm a little bit. I said, your work is the bane of my existence right now. So instead he gave me a hug and he said, you'll get through it. And I said, thank you very much. But talk to me in December when I get my passing grade and I can continue on with my PhD work. So anyway, I also wanted to say that yesterday Chris's keynote was also very exciting, and I was proud to be in the room when he was talking. But you know, I want you to have the perspective that Chris is the devil on your shoulder and I will be the angel. Okay. So you will not hear F-bombs, you will not hear crew jokes. I'm sorry for those in the room that love that, but this is me. So before I begin, I want to tell you a little bit about my journey. Before 2008, my career was primarily focused in marketing, project management, and strategic initiatives. Then a personal situation launched me into the space of security. Starting around the end of 2007, I became the target of cyber stalking by a colleague. A situation you can probably imagine reframes how you think about privacy and security and about how we all behave on the internet. This was something that totally changed my life. That sounds like a Hallmark card, I know, but it did. But unlike some stalkers, mine wasn't caught. Lots of people say, where is he? Did he get caught? Was he brought to justice? Unfortunately, no. And he wasn't, because he used Tor. Go figure. So, unlike other victims, I didn't want to be the poster child of cyber stalking. In fact, I have to tell you that it's a little uncomfortable for me to even talk about it anymore, because it's like opening up old wounds. But I will say that what it did was it inspired me to learn, to figure out why the technology works the way it does, because I had no idea what the heck was happening to me. I was getting text messages on my phone. I was being told by law enforcement that they couldn't get him because he was using this magical thing called Tor. I'm like, what do you mean? He's sitting in California. You know who he is, I know who he is, but you're not going to be able to get him. I had a restraining order and the judge vacated it because she said he's using Tor and we can't identify him without a doubt. So I wanted to learn how the technology worked. I wanted to figure out why the system of law enforcement wasn't equipped to help victims of cyber-related crimes. And I wanted to learn more about what people think about how much they're putting out there on the internet. I'm a mom of 2 teenage girls, and I'm very aware of how much they're putting out there on the internet. But I also wanted to be able to talk to people to help them understand you have to pause. You have to think about what you're putting out there. Not to scare the crap out of people. I'm sure Chris would use stronger words than that, but not to scare the crap out of people by telling them this horrible story of cyber stalking. But I want people to understand that, you know what, there's real people, intelligent, good, kind people that are put into situations they never wanted to be in. And those situations have to change you. But not everybody should have to go through all that horrible crap to be able to do things differently. So at the end of 2011, I hit my lowest point. Now, 2008 to 2011, we're talking 3 years. And he didn't just attack me, he attacked everyone in my life. If you were loosely associated with me, you would be contacted by this person to have them tell you what a horrible, horrible person I was. So I was not only answering had to answer to him and get his attacks, but I had to answer to all the people in my life who are also being contacted and explaining to them the situation. So after almost 3 years of fear and uncertainty, I decided it was time to get busy living or get busy dying. This is an awesome movie, by the way. Hopefully you guys have seen it. If you haven't seen it, Shawshank Redemption. Tim Robbins is adorable. But I didn't want my work to be focused on him. That's what stalkers like. They like all the focus to be on them. I wanted my efforts to be focused on leveling up and adding to the conversation. And look, I will never be a programmer. I'm happy with that. And my hat's off to all of you who are programmers, because you create the technology that makes our lives as wonderful as it is today and as secure as it is today. So I thank you for that. But then, in 2012, I was sitting in a conference similar to this, kind of pissed off, because it was a conference on employers against cyberstalking. And I thought, hey, as a marketing professional, I should be up there talking. But instead, they had Andrew Lumen from the Tor Project talking. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go to this conference, okay? I'm going to wear my pointy shoes. And I'm going to sit there, and I'm going to listen to this guy, and then I'm going to go up, and I'm going to punch him in the arm and say, your technology is getting in the way of me having peace in my life and justice in my life. But something happened. Andrew's talking. I'm like, okay. It literally was an epiphany. I went up to him afterwards, and I said, Andrew, I need a job. He's like, what? I said, I don't know if you remember me, but I called you about 2 years ago. And I summarized the situation. He's like, I remember talking to you. I said, good. I need a job. He's like, why? I said, because every time I went to look for a job, my stalker got in the way. And believe it or not, employers are afraid of cyber stalkers. They're afraid on how that's going to come back to them. So he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I do stuff. I'm a project manager. I'm a marketer. I can do whatever you want me to do. I just want to work. And he said, all right, come and write our annual report. I said, fantastic. So I joined the Tor Project, helping with marketing, outreach, fundraising, and dealing with the press. Many people have asked me, how can you work for the technology your stalker used to attack you? Well, my response at first was, I have no idea. They gave me a job. But as I thought about it, I said, why not be around the people who can teach me how to be safe? Why not be around these brilliant, brilliant minds that are working in this space and really passionate about freedom of speech on the internet, passionate about anonymity, and passionate about privacy? Those are the people that I want to be surrounded by and I want to learn from. So I decided to join on. So over the past 2 years, I've had the unique view into the world of anonymity, privacy, and open source technology. Holy cow, what a different beast that is. And how it's all really, really complicated. There's no easy answers. And anybody who sits on one side of the fence or the other regarding the questions of anonymity and privacy on the internet, I think is full of crap. Respectfully. Again, my halo is glowing, hopefully. But I really do, because there are important issues out there in the world that we still don't have answers to. And for anybody to dig their heels in and say, I'm all about, shutting down tools like Tor in order to have all the bad guys in the world, exposed out there, I think is just ridiculous. Because if you shut down Tor, you're shutting down the anonymity and privacy tools for other people who need it to survive. For the journalists working in Syria who are working in environments where if they aren't protected, they could be killed. You are protecting the victims of domestic violence whose husbands or partners are tracking them on a daily basis. You are giving these people hope. So if you take away Tor, yes, maybe you'll get a couple of bad guys, but you know what? Let me tell you, those bad guys, they're motivated. They will go find something else. So many of you already know how Tor works. I'm not going to go into a technical conversation, but I'm happy to if anybody wants to afterwards. But what I want to talk about are some of the experiences I've had at Tor and the questions around privacy. And it's interesting when you're sort of thrusted into the public view of defending rights of privacy and freedom of speech on the internet, all while thinking, wow, the bad guys are out there. And what do they really want? So I started talking to the press and participating on task force to help human trafficking and child pornography, help issues around human trafficking and child pornography. And I'll tell you a story about that in a little bit. But what I want to do is talk a little bit about Tor and then actually raise to you some of the important questions that I've seen that have come up around privacy that I really want you to think about as you're in your work and in your lives, frankly, because privacy isn't something you just do while you're at work. It's something that we have to think about all the time. So, my job was to help people understand that our mission of Tor was to build software and to conduct research. Tor is not, well, okay, I'm going to pause because I don't want to say something that's going to be recorded on YouTube. Tor's mission really is building software and conducting research. There are people in our community, however, that are very vocal on certain issues around privacy and anonymity, okay? And when you're working in an open source environment, you have to deal with the community as well as the organization. But at the end of the day, whenever I talk to the press, it was all about we create technology and we do research. And who do we do it for? Well, we do it for drug dealers, right? Everybody knows Silk Road. Everybody knows about hidden services. We also do it for our heroes. God, this is being recorded again. No, but honestly, Tor is built to help people like Edward Snowden, like others, get the word out. Whether the word that they're getting out there is right or wrong, the technology is there to help them do it. By the way, I'm not convinced that was his laptop, but I do know where he got the sticker. Oh, and that photograph launched about 3 weeks of constant communication with the press. That was the most challenging 3 weeks of my entire career, was when that picture came out. Because all of a sudden, Tor was launched into the space of not just around technology, but it was really launched in the space of privacy and anonymity in a very, very big way. But we also, as I mentioned, we build the technology to help journalists. I do a lot of training, a lot of conversations with journalists because you know what? They are, most of them, especially who do foreign service type reporting, are very good at understanding physical security. You know, don't be in a place where you might get killed kind of security. But often they don't understand digital security. And so I love talking to journalists. I love telling them about how to use Tor, how to use other privacy and anonymity tools to help keep them safe. But I also like to do it to open their minds to not only how what they do impacts their security, but how what their sources do also impacts their security. So one of the things I'm very passionate about is not just transferring the knowledge that I have, but also doing it in a way that they can bring it on to others. So, as I mentioned, Tor is a community, and we are a community without borders, without governance, and without structure. It's a network of people. At last count, I think there were over 5,500 Tor relay operators, volunteers in the world. It's very hard for people to understand that how Tor operates really is about that network. And that network is full of volunteers. Can you imagine your organization being completely driven by 5,000 plus faceless volunteers, some of them nameless volunteers? How would that change how you can do your job? You're at the mercy of all these volunteers. So some of this network of people, they hide in plain view. Some are hidden in other ways, but they're all committed to Tor's technology, and they're committed to keeping Tor in the world. So, and by the way, that thing came up in Paris when it was determined one of our developers actually released a story timely. It was, we were all at the developers conference in Paris, the entire organization, and he decided to release this story to the press about how the NSA was tracking any of the Tor Project email accounts, and how people who were associated with the Tor Project, anyone who was associated and working for the Tor Project, was a terrorist. And that was a really difficult thing to experience as a mom, as a professional, as somebody who believes in privacy. But when this came out, somebody in our community, of course, made a t-shirt, and I freaked out. I'm like, oh my God, we have to put a cap on this. But again, that's the challenge when you're dealing with a community versus an organization where you have governance. Anyway, I think they took it down. But let's talk about privacy versus security. Now, Chris touched on this yesterday, so I'm not going to go through, and he did an excellent job going through all those crazy slides. I loved it. But I do want to talk to you about the difference between the two, because it's important. And it's important not just for your work, but it's important for how you're communicating, talking with end users. Okay, because even if in your organization you are a B2B type of organization, or you're not directly related to end users, when you are out there in the world talking to family members, talking to friends, talking to anybody who wants you to do technical support, does anybody have family members who ask you to do tech support? Okay, you're talking to them, though you're talking to end users. So what I hope that you'll take away from this is some new thoughts around privacy and security in a way that you can talk to those folks. So, privacy, the ability to control what personal information is shared out there. Okay, simple. Keep a simple definition of privacy in mind. Security is a resistance of desired loss. They are kissing cousins, no doubt, but they are very, very different concepts. So often when people come to me and say, you know what, Kelley, I want to talk about privacy. It's great, let's talk. What does privacy mean to you? Is the first question I ask them, because often people mix up the two. So the first thing I'd like to ask is that you be clear about what privacy means and the difference it is to security. And yesterday, I don't agree with, well, actually, I do agree with Chris's statement about the end users. But they're not the only weakest link in our system of privacy and security. The technology. You know, I just wrote a research paper. I presented it last week at a conference. It's a taxonomy around privacy-enhancing tools for the World Wide Web. And I looked at things like Steganos, iQuick, DuckDuckGo, and it wasn't to bang on their technology and say, you know, you've got all this stuff that's not working. It was more around, let me understand what you say that you're delivering to end users, and then what your terms of agreement are really saying you will do or not do if, you know, your feet are put to the fire. And helping to bridge that gap so that end users understand, look, if I use DuckDuckGo without Tor, I'm not going to be secure. Okay? If I use Steganos, the free version, I'm not going to be secure. And there's several of the technologies that I researched that openly say in their terms of agreement that if they are subpoenaed or if they are contacted by law enforcement, they will give up their user data. Okay? This is, again, not to scare people, but it's all about helping end users understand where privacy falls and where the technology will help them or not help them, depending on the situation. But again, the weakest links can be the end users. It can be our technology. It can also be what we don't know yet. You know, Jesus, 2008, I was really happy in my little marketing space, doing my project management, not worried, just thinking, you know, these magical developers out there will create products that will keep me safe. Then I was kicked out of that mindset, realizing that it's much bigger, and I have to educate myself in order to be safe. And there are far more questions out there than answers. But let's be honest, we are our own worst enemies when it comes to protecting privacy. And I love having debates with people. I love having the conversation. I had a conversation in the speaker's lounge with a gentleman yesterday. I can't see him out there, and I forget his name. We were talking with Jim, and he was telling me about how he keeps himself secure through a burner laptop and some other things. And it was fun because then I asked him questions like, but how did you buy that plane ticket to that island that you went to bring that burner laptop to? And it's fun having those conversations to poke the holes in people's ideas of privacy and security. The other thing I just want to mention is that in those conversations that you're having with the real people in your life, your friends and your family, have real conversations with them about privacy and security, not to scare them, but just to understand where they're at. I had a conversation with a parent. I gave a talk at a high school. Again, I try not to give the big, giant, scary story and saying, oh, yeah, I was cyber-stalked for going on 7 years. I was cyber-stalked. It's awful. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody. What I try and do is help people understand that, you know what, it can happen to just about anybody. And this mom comes up to me and she said, you know what? My kid's phone doesn't have Wi-Fi, so he will never be cyberbullied. This is real, and this is an educated, smart woman. And I don't have a good poker face, so I will never play poker here at LastCon. If you ever offer it, I'll lose my shirt. But I said to her, it's much bigger than that. I said, cyberbullying and the issues of privacy are much bigger than just not having Wi-Fi in your phone. So she was trying to wrap her head around that. But as parents, she was also trying to figure out some solutions for her kids. But back to the issues of, that I want to talk about in this talk. Have any of you stood next to somebody on a bus or in an airport or something who is on the phone just gabbing away, or sitting at a Starbucks with their laptop right out there in the open? The one that I love the best is when I was standing in line at Starbucks, in my local Starbucks, and this woman's on her cell phone reading off her credit card information to somebody on the phone. Holy cow! We talk about privacy, we talk about wanting security, and yet we've got people walking around on their phones talking to whomever with the world listening. Tom from Qualys, I don't know if he's in the room, talked about an example that he was sitting in his hotel earlier this week and joined a conversation with some people who were talking about some new business development. And not once did they ask who he was. And he was engaging in the conversation. Okay? So I find it very funny that people are raising these big flags of we have to have privacy on the internet, we have to have security, and yet our own human behaviors are getting in the way of things working well. This woman is a prime example. So, I don't want to be fatalistic about this, but there are big questions that we have to answer. Where is my data really going? And these questions that I'm going to show you come out of lots of conversations I've had with people, with the press, and in my own research. But what people are starting to ask is, where is our data really going? And I don't think anybody in this room can truly answer that. Even Chris, if he was sitting here. Who are the third parties that are using our data? You know, everybody talks about that Target breach, right? And I've had people come up to me and say, Kelley, what do you think about what happened to Target? And I'm like, it was a third party that had the issue. It wasn't Target, but Target was the casualty of it because they had to manage that third party. But if you think about from a non-security, from a more business perspective, that's a difficult conversation for people to wrap their minds around. Who really sees my information? Who's seeing the traffic? Who's seeing the end-to-end conversations? These are important questions that end users are asking. And this is a big one. Oops, I got ahead of myself. What assumptions are being made? So one of the things that my crazy stalker did was that he went out to certain things that he knew that I was doing. At that time, I had a Facebook account. I don't have one anymore, so don't ask me. But what he did was he went out to Facebook and he was trolling my emails. He works for a technology company that I will not say because I believe he's still there. And he would take pieces of information and craft a story woven in with all of his craziness, okay? And he would present it out to the world as truth, as gospel, and say, this is Kelly. See, I've got all these facts and these figures. And so people started making assumptions about me, assumptions that I had to dismiss, that I had to fight to counteract. So what people aren't realizing in these issues of privacy and security is that all this data that's being collected about us is not necessarily just in these little buckets. People can make assumptions that may or may not be accurate, and so what are we going to do about that? If somebody were to look at my traffic, and I'm sure the NSA has, based on my work at Tor. In fact, I did have an experience where I saw my cursor doing things without me even touching my own laptop. But you know, what if somebody looked at my traffic? They would see things like Kelly was researching all of those anonymity tools. They would see things that I flew to Purdue, that I was researching like crazy S-boxes, DES, Diffie-Hellman, and elliptical curves for about 4 weeks straight. But they would also see the things in my personal life that are related to my children, that are not related to my work. So what sorts of assumptions are people going to make about us with all this data out there? Lots of people I talk with say, I don't need Tor. I don't need security tools. I have nothing to hide, so who cares if the NSA or anyone else is looking at my data? And what I say to them is, you know what? You're probably right. You're probably a great person. You have nothing to hide, but you know what? How do you know where it's all going? How do you know who's going to protect it? I want to be able to know that at the end of the day, that what is out there about me on the internet is true and honorable and good. And I can't, because people are also out there making assumptions and invading my privacy and invading my security. So we have to think about this a little bit more. The other example that I give people is that, look, you may have someone in your life who is diagnosed with cancer. And first thing you do, if you have a tragedy like that happens, you go on Google or WebMD, and you start researching, what is this cancer? What is my loved one going to have to face? So all of a sudden, you're now in a bucket by the advertisers around cancer. But it's not you, it's this person over here. So how do we protect ourselves and all of this information that we're putting out there? I do love this sign. So we can't predict with full certainty the privacy concerns of the future, no doubt. There's probably another Edward Snowden situation looming out there. There's probably going to be lots more around cyber stalking, I would imagine. Cyberbullying became hot, and then all of a sudden it's not as much in the news anymore. But we don't know where we're going. But as security professionals, and this is what I'm urging all of you to help me with and help others with, is to do a better job. And doing a better job means we have to help people understand that anonymity does love company. And I love this slide. I love this slight digression, because when I talk to groups, younger groups than this, no offense to anybody in the room, the first thing I ask is, who is the band? You'd be amazed at how many people do not know who the band is. But what I love about this, and how this, seriously. But what I loved about this, and what I've used it for in other talks actually, especially if I'm talking about cyber stalking, is that my stalker walks around looking like all of you, just a normal person. But the anonymity, the tools that he's using is allowing to hide him and hide his behavior. Vice versa, I get to now use these tools to protect myself. And that's the balancing act that we have to face. So, these are the things. I took out my call to action slide because Chris made it sound like that would be really stupid to have in. So now you're going to get a different flavor of it. So here's what I'm asking all of you to do. First, bring more voices to the table. I understand that many of you have come up the ranks, very hard work, lots of time, lots of education, computer science and technology, coding, hacking your little fingers off. I get it. But you know what? There are people that have not done that still have a value to add to the conversation. Bring more voices to the conversation. If you're talking about security and privacy, bring in non-technical people to the conversation. Keep asking important questions even when there might not be any answers. People ask me tough questions all the time, and I'm like, I don't know. Let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. We can't always know what's going to happen in the future. And in the space that we're dealing with security, just look at the evolution over the past 8 years. Holy cow. We would never been able to imagine that we would be in today's environment regarding security and privacy. Align technology and privacy policies with users. It's great. All the work that you all are doing is fantastic. But if you don't step out of your world and start connecting it with policy and what the end users are saying and doing and behaving, it's going to be for naught. So I ask you to please align your work with privacy policies and users. Oh, just back to that one quick thing. I'm curious about, there's this trend of having privacy officers in organizations. And at first I was like, yes, now people are starting to shine some light on what privacy, or the importance of privacy in an organization. And I was like, no. Why have privacy in a box? And for me, when I hear about a position like a chief of privacy officer in an organization, it feels like they're putting privacy in the box, like that's their job. So we don't have to think about it. Just a slight digression. Educate yourself and help users. Look, I went to graduate school 17 years after my master's degree. Yes, I'm totally dating myself right now. 17 years after I finished my MBA, I started my PhD. I have learned how to be a student again, and it's hard, and it's humbling, and it sucks in many, many ways. But I do it because I think it's important. It's important because there's lots of stuff, much of what all of you know that I don't know, but there are lots of things that I still have to discover in this area in order to help end users. Embrace beginner's mind. Martin said that yesterday. Please, please, please. Even though somebody doesn't know how to do a secure password, please don't treat them like an idiot. Okay? If they don't know how to use PGP, which is a wonderful tool, but a bear to teach anybody, please don't treat them like an idiot. Remember, technology is not the enemy or should have the answers, but we do have the responsibilities. Lots of times people would come to me and say, if Tor did not exist, then we would be able to get all the child pornographers in the world. I'm like, great. So I was sitting in a conference similar to this in Washington, D.C., and the head of the International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, Ernie Allen, stood up at the podium and said, banged on the podium and said, you know what? If we didn't have Tor, we wouldn't have child pornographers out there. And then he went on to say, and Tor is a bunch of developers all dressed in black, sitting in a basement, who are afraid to show their faces. So, again, my halo is glowing. So I sat there and listened, and then at the end of the conference, or at the end of his talk, lots of people were talking to him afterwards, and I said, Mr. Allen, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Kelley Misata, and I'm with the Tor Project. And he just looked at me, and he said, hi. And I said, do I look like a developer that's been sitting in the basement coding? And he's like, no. I said, then I think we need to have a seat at the table. If you're going to have conversations around how to help the issues of human trafficking and child pornography in our country, and talk about it in terms of how technology is facilitating that, I want a seat at the table. I spent 6 months on a task force in Washington, D.C. with about 16 other people, including FBI, Secret Service, lots of other big name company or big name organizations down in D.C., helping them to understand that technology is not evil. People can be evil. The technology is amoral, and we have to remember that. And that was very, very difficult because for 3 years I had nightmares, very vivid nightmares about Tor, until I realized it's not the technology, it was him. Collaborate with non-techies. Again, that's part of the message here. So tonight I challenge you to write down your own definition of privacy for you and for your family. And think about what you're doing to protect it. Now, I know that you could do that in a heartbeat, and you would say all this great technology that you're using to protect your privacy. But think about it in terms of your kids, your partners, your spouses, your family. Define what privacy means to you. Then think about how that translates into the work that you're doing, and how you hold your own values and definitions of privacy. For me, I don't have a choice anymore. My view and my definition of privacy was altered the second I met that person. And I wouldn't have wished it, is not the path I chose, because privacy becomes important when something happens to wake us up. But I don't want the bad stuff to happen to people. I want us to figure out how to address these issues of privacy before that stuff happens. So, I'm going to be a superhero, Wonder Woman, if you couldn't guess, because she's got great boots. But I also want to say that, to tell you all that in early September, I left the Tor Project. Not because I lost faith in the technology or the mission, but because of many of the reasons that Chris talked about yesterday in his talk. Sometimes there are environments where non-technical people and females in this industry cannot succeed. So now I'm working on my PhD at Purdue. I'm a third-year PhD student, finishing up my coursework if I pass this stupid cryptography class. And if anybody's willing to tutor me, I pay really well. I'm not kidding. And my spirit animal, as Chris talked about, is Dr. Gene Spafford. He was the one who had me stand up and say, I refuse to be a victim. I also work and help out the Open Information Security Foundation. Why I'm involved in another open source project, I have no idea. A glutton for punishment. It's a wonderful community, but it's different. Suricata is an IDS IPS engine. If anybody's interested, I can tell you more later. I think I'm running out of time. I'm going to spend a lot of my time with elliptical curves. I have my homework in my bag to do on the airplane. But my passion, my work, my focus in my life right now is bridging the gap between the non-technical world, non-technical audience and the technical folks. I want to help all of you get the work that you're doing out there to people who don't understand any of your language. And I do it for them. These are my daughters. And enough said. Sorry if I went over time.
This isn't really so much a question. I just wanted to say that I really appreciate your bravery and honesty. I thought that was it was great to hear you. And a lot of what you spoke about I can identify with. I'll talk to you later. And my son's a math major, and he tutored me on cryptography for my CISP exam. I don't know if that's...
I'll hire him. I'll Skype him. I don't care.
He's a good tutor. He really explains things very well.
I have 6 more weeks to get through. So.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You wouldn't believe me. I can't hire a tutor anywhere. I've asked.
Raise it high if you have questions. I can see it.
I have a question. Everything in life, there's like two sides. Like I have a knife can help people to cut meat, make life easier. The same time can kill people. Like I think technology is the same thing. On one side can help people communicate to each other, interact. For instance, like I have a family overseas, I can see immediately, picture the family, know what's going on, understand. Used to pay like a few dollars every minute call, not able to see pictures. And everything in life is like this, two sides. I think we're never going to resolve this problem. And what you can do is like a vaccine, anything else, we need to adapt to situation and try to overcome that. And like Ebola now is a big problem. Maybe in a few months, not a big problem anymore. I think it's same. There's an endless target. We need the key for us is not blame anybody, but how quickly we can adjust to the situation. This is my point.
No, I agree completely, and I think, my experiences at Tor made me realize, especially in the press, and there are members of the press who I really respect, and there's members of the press who I want nowhere near me because they've got such bad energy and morals. But what I realize is that people want to point the finger at something when stuff happens. When bad stuff happens, they want to point their finger and say, okay, it's Tor's fault that this happened. Hey, I did it. As soon as the FBI agents who took on my case in 2010 called me on the phone and said, you know what? There's nothing we can do because he's using Tor. I fell to my knees and I said, how can you tell me this? This is the highest level of law enforcement in our country, and you're telling me that this one person, I have to just live with it? This is one person. You know who he is. And they said, we can't. He's using Tor. We have to wait for him to screw up. So for me, the whole bane of my existence back then was this technology, until you realize that it's not. It's the people on the other side.
Okay. Maybe one more question. Anybody? Oh, where? Oh.
These
Actually,
lovely girls who wrote the
Yeah.
bowl last night. Did you
my
both of you write the bowl? Yeah.
These are actually my daughters, by the way. So
Hi.
keep it short.
Well, I'm distinctly non-technical, and I like to keep things private because there are a lot of creeps out there, as you can know just by looking at YouTube comments. So I was wondering if there were just any simple ways, that non-technical people like me and my sister and my mother could keep stuff we put out there private and keep our lives private.
The first thing to do is think about it. Think about what you're doing. Lots of times, this technology is so easy for us to use, we've become unconscious when we're sending a text message. How many people in this room, I'm going to get to that in one second, how many people in this room have sent a text message that you wish you could get back? The second you hit the send button, you're like, oh crap, I shouldn't have done that. Right? Come on, I know everyone in this room has done that. So even though you're not raising your hand, I know. I'm a mom, I have secret powers. Okay? But you have to think about it before you do it. That's the first layer of privacy and security before the devices. Then think about how you're using your technology. Make sure your geolocators are off. Make sure if you're doing things that you really want to be kept private, use Tor. Tor is easy to use. And you will not be a bad guy if you use Tor, please. Know that you will. I use Tor. My children use Tor. My daughter used Tor to watch Netflix when we were at the Tor developers meeting in Reykjavik. Having the developers helping her, of course, which was odd. But the first level of any privacy is knowing yourself and your own behavior. So do that. Okay.
And by the way, she's not that untechnical, and I'm kind of ashamed now for being the security guy in the house for having asked this kind of question.
That's okay. The shoemaker's children don't wear shoes.
I just have kind of a comment. I really believe that about 98% of the users out there have no clue how their privacy is not private. It's not really private, what they put out there. Anything they do, they really have no clue. And when I try to tell people, I come across as a conspiracy theorist. and they just write me off. But it's incredible how much lack of privacy there is.
You come across as scary. And this is going to be one of the biggest challenges. I should have had a slide for it. In your work, please try and frame things that they're not scary. I had colleagues of mine at Tor that they would launch a conversation with, let me tell you about all the journalists that I know that have gotten killed because they didn't use Tor. Okay? You can't launch a conversation like that because people are going to be like, I don't want anything to do with it, right? So when you're talking about security, trust me, from somebody who wasn't brought up in this space, the first way to get people to listen to you is to tell them something that's, I don't want to say gentle because that sounds weak, but something that is softened a little bit, okay? When you talk about PGP, do not talk about how ugly and scary it is. Talk about how it can function for them. You probably all remember when passwords first came on the scene in security, right? And everybody had their mother's maiden name, or their birth date, or their dog's name. But today, if you ask general users about their passwords, the majority will say to you, yep, I've got numbers, I've got special characters, I've got, phrasing. It takes a long time for people to change their behaviors, but when they do, wow. And that's what we have to do with all these other pieces of security. We have to teach users how to do it in a way that is persistent, that's polite, and doesn't scare the pants off of them. I would not put any of the Tor developers in a room with non-technical people. But I can explain Tor in a way that non-technical people can get. Some of it's involving envelopes and pieces of paper and teaching them about the relays in our system. But what I hope all of you will take away also from this is that, you guys can be pretty intimidating. This community can be very intimidating, not only as a non-technical person, but as a woman. And I really urge you to be mindful and aware of that, because we have a lot of value to add to this conversation. We may not be a part of, the process in the way that you want us to be. We do to a certain degree, okay? And the reason why I'm going to challenge you on that is because as a professional, I understand why I have to learn cryptography as a part of this program, right? But I don't understand why I have to calculate XORs. All right? So it's understanding how deep you need to bring users in order to get the message through. Because the whole point is to get the message through. How you get there doesn't really matter. Just get the message through. But I do urge you very, very much to understand it's not because you're scary people, because honestly, this is one of the best audiences and the best conferences I've ever been in, because I felt so welcomed and so at home here with this group. I hope to come back next year, because I want to take all of this and bring it to other security conferences. I personally will not go to RSA, because it's not a comfortable space for me to be in. I hope it will change someday, but as a woman and as a non-technical person, it's a difficult environment to be in. Maybe when I have my PhD, I'll go back and then I have a PhD, don't bug me, shirt or something. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Kelley.